Welcome to ZoomInData. In modern DBT projects, efficiency and maintainability often rely on reusable SQL logic. DBT macros, Jinja templates, and advanced SQL logic allow data engineers to write dynamic, modular, and reusable transformations. In this section, we cover advanced macro usage, dynamic SQL generation with Jinja, and real-world scenarios where these techniques reduce code duplication, enforce standards, and simplify maintenance. This knowledge is highly valued in interviews and production projects. Subscribe to ZoomInData for structured DBT learning, real-world examples, and interview-focused preparation. What is a DBT macro? Answer. A DBT macro is a reusable SQL or Jinja function. It allows you to encapsulate repetitive logic. Macros can be called across multiple models, snapshots, or analyses. They improve maintainability, reduce errors, and enforce standard practices in DBT projects. What is Jinja in DBT? Answer. Jinja is a templating language used to generate dynamic SQL in DBT. It allows for loops, conditionals, and variables in SQL files. Jinja makes models flexible and reusable. Combined with macros, it enables advanced data transformations. How are macros different from models? Answer. Models are compiled SQL queries resulting in tables or views. Macros are reusable functions, not directly materialized. Macros can be used inside models to simplify SQL. They allow standardization across multiple models. How do you call a macro in a DBT model? Answer. Use the Jinja syntax. my_macro. arg1, arg2. The macro executes and returns SQL code or values. Can be nested inside models or other macros. Supports dynamic and reusable SQL logic. What are common uses of macros in DBT? Answer. Reusable filters or joins. Dynamic SQL generation based on parameters. Standardized calculations, e.g., currency conversions or date formatting. Generic tests like null checks or uniqueness validations. How does Jinja support dynamic SQL in DBT? Answer. Jinja allows loops, conditionals, and variable substitution. SQL can change based on environment, model, or input parameters. Reduces duplication of similar queries. Improves maintainability in large DBT projects. What is a variable in DBT and how is it used with Jinja? Answer. Variables store values that can be reused in models or macros. Defined in dbt_project.yml or passed via CLI. Used with Jinja syntax. var. variable_name. Supports environment-specific logic and dynamic model behavior. Can macros call other macros in DBT? Answer. Yes. Macros can be nested. Enables modular and layered logic. Complex SQL can be broken into reusable components. Encourages consistency across DBT projects. How can Jinja loops improve DBT model efficiency? Answer. Loops allow iterating over lists of columns or tables. Reduces repetitive SQL statements. Can generate multiple similar statements dynamically. Improves maintainability and reduces human error. How can macros improve testing in DBT? Answer. Macros can define generic tests like not_null or unique. Instead of writing the same test multiple times, call the macro. Supports consistent testing standards across projects. Simplifies addition of new models with standard tests. What is the role of Jinja conditionals in DBT? Answer. Conditionals, if, else, allow dynamic SQL generation based on parameters or environment. Enables models to adjust behavior without multiple versions. Supports different transformations for dev, test, or prod environments. Reduces duplicated code and maintenance overhead. How can macros make DBT projects more maintainable? Answer. Centralizes repeated logic in one place. Updates in a macro reflect across all models using it. Reduces errors from manually updating multiple models. Encourages standardized patterns across teams. How do you pass parameters to a macro in DBT? Answer. Parameters are defined in the macro signature. Macro my_macro, arg1, arg2, called as my_macro, value 1, value 2. Enables dynamic SQL generation based on input values. Supports reusable and flexible transformations. How do you debug a macro in DBT? Answer. Use dbt compile to see the compiled SQL. Add print statements using log, message. Test macro logic in isolation with temporary models. Helps identify syntax or logic errors before production runs. How can macros support multi-warehouse DBT projects? Answer. Macros can encapsulate warehouse-specific SQL differences. Use conditionals for Snowflake, BigQuery, or Redshift syntax. Allows consistent model logic without duplicating code. Simplifies cross-warehouse project maintenance. How does Jinja support dynamic date filtering in DBT? Answer. Use Jinja to compute dates dynamically. var start_date, or macros. date_add. Filters like where date greater than equals, start_date, adjust automatically. Reduces manual changes for recurring transformations. Essential for incremental and partitioned models. How can macros help enforce company-wide SQL standards? Answer. Centralize common calculations or naming conventions in macros. Every model calls the same macro, ensuring uniformity. Reduces deviations and errors across multiple teams. Makes audits and code reviews easier. How can macros be used to create dynamic incremental models? Answer. Macros can generate where clauses based on dates or last updated timestamps. Incremental models reference these macros to load only new data. Reduces execution time and warehouse costs. Supports large-scale production pipelines efficiently. How do you manage complex macros with nested logic? Answer. Break logic into smaller helper macros. Document input, output clearly. Use Jinja conditionals for dynamic behavior. Test each component independently before integration. How does DBT handle macro versioning? Answer. Macros are versioned as part of the DBT project in Git. Changes are tracked, reviewed, and merged like any code. Teams can roll back if a macro update breaks models. Supports safe collaborative development. How can macros and Jinja reduce technical debt in DBT? Answer. Reusable macros prevent duplicated SQL logic. Jinja allows dynamic, maintainable transformations. Reduces hard-coded values and repetitive queries. Simplifies long-term maintenance and scaling. How can you use macros to standardize date and time transformations? Answer. Define a macro that converts timestamps or adjusts time zones. Use it consistently across all models. Ensures uniform formatting and reduces errors. Supports analytics consistency across reports. How do macros support dynamic table selection in DBT? Answer. Use macros with parameters to select tables dynamically. Can iterate over multiple tables or environments. Reduces repetitive model creation. Enables flexible multi-environment deployments. How can macros handle conditional logic for data cleaning? Answer. Define macros for null handling, type conversion, or default values. Use Jinja conditionals to apply rules only when necessary. Ensures consistent data cleaning across models. Simplifies troubleshooting and auditing. Why is mastery of macros and Jinja critical for DBT interviews? Answer. Shows ability to write efficient, reusable, and maintainable SQL. Demonstrates advanced DBT project knowledge. Reflects real-world experience with dynamic and scalable pipelines. Differentiates candidates for mid to senior DBT roles. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and follow ZoomInData for more DBT tutorials and interview-focused content. If you want more questions on real-time DBT projects, contact ZoomInData. See you in the next video.